The black SUV skidded to a violent stop, tires screaming against rain-slick asphalt. "Watch it, Kale," I snapped, my hand bracing against the dashboard. But my twin didn't answer. Kale never ignored me. Something cold slid down my spine. I followed his gaze through the windshield, and everything inside me shattered. There, under a flickering streetlight, stood a figure barely holding themselves upright. Thin, so thin it hurt to look at. A worn hoodie clung to their frame, soaked through, outlining the unmistakable curve of a heavily pregnant belly. One hand clutched it protectively. The other held a cardboard sign. Even through the rain, I could read it. "Hungry pregnant, please help." My throat closed. "No," Kale whispered, voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before. The figure shifted, flinching at the passing headlights, and then slowly looked up. Golden eyes met mine. Familiar. Too familiar. Soren. The name tore out of me like something dying. 9 months. 9 months since we'd thrown him out. If you are not subscribed yet now, please hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. Let's back to the story. 9 months since we'd believed every poisoned word our cousin Riven fed us. 9 months since we called our Omega a liar. A traitor. A disgrace. Soren's eyes widened in recognition. Then fear took over. He stumbled back, turning, trying to walk away, too fast, too unsteady for someone about to give birth any day. "Get out," Kale said, already opening his door. Rain hit us like needles the second we stepped outside. I moved without thinking, cutting off Soren's path. Kale circled behind him. Old instincts. Hunting instincts. God, what the hell were we doing? "Soren, wait," I called. "Don't," he choked out, clutching his stomach tighter. "Don't come near me." His voice. It wasn't the same. It used to be warm, sharp, alive. Now it sounded like something worn down to nothing. My chest tightened painfully. "We didn't know," Kale said, stepping closer despite Soren flinching away. "Riven lied, everything." A broken laugh ripped from Soren. "Of course he did." Rain dripped from his lashes as he looked between us. "And you believed him." Silence hit like a blow. "You didn't even ask me," he continued, voice shaking but rising. "You didn't give me one chance to explain, not one." Each word landed like a knife. "We found out," I forced out. 3 weeks ago, he confessed he was the one selling information. He framed you." Soren swayed. For a second I thought he might collapse. Kale reached out instinctively. "Don't touch me," Soren snapped, stumbling back. His breathing was uneven. "Too fast. Too strained." "You threw me out," he said, quieter now. "With nothing, you made sure no one would help me. Do you have any idea what that does to someone?" I did. Now I did. And it made me sick. My gaze dropped. To his stomach. Huge. Heavy. Reality crashed into me all at once. "Is it ours?" Kale asked hoarsely. Soren looked at him like he'd just said something unforgivable. "You kicked me out 9 months ago," he said flatly. "You tell me." My vision blurred. Twins. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. 2 heartbeats. 2 lives. Our children. And he'd carried them alone. On the street. Begging. "Come home," I said immediately, desperation clawing up my throat. "Please, Soren, just come back, we'll fix this." "Fix," he repeated softly. Then he laughed. It wasn't human. "You think you can fix this?" A sharp inhale cut him off. His body went rigid. Hand tightening over his stomach. "Soren," Kale stepped forward again, panic breaking through. Another breath. Shaky. Painful. "No," Soren whispered, "not now." My blood ran cold. "Is that contraction?" he said, teeth clenched. "Too soon. Or maybe not. Maybe his body had just held on as long as it could." His knees buckled. This time Kale caught him, and Soren didn't fight. Didn't have the strength to. "We're taking you to a hospital," I said, already pulling out my phone. "I can't pay." "I don't care," I snapped. "You're not arguing this." Another contraction hit. Soren gasped, gripping Kale's shirt. For a moment. Just a moment. He leaned into him. Like he used to. Then it was gone. We have a private facility, Kale said quickly. Doctor's ready, you'll be safe. Soren's laugh was weak now. Of course you do, he murmured. You have everything. And we had nothing that mattered. Not anymore. Not without him. The drive was chaos. I ran every red light. Every rule. Every line. In the backseat, Kale held Soren as another contraction tore through him. Breathe, Kale murmured, voice shaking. Oh thanks, Soren gasped. Great advice. Even in pain. Still him. Still sharp. Still fighting. And it broke something inside me. By the time we reached the hospital entrance, staff were already waiting. They rushed him inside. Questions. Vitals. Movement. Too fast. Not fast enough. Any prenatal care. No. The nurse's pause said everything. Guilt crushed my lungs. They wheeled him into a private room. Soft lights. Clean sheets. Everything he should have had months ago. I'm not paying for this, Soren muttered. We are, I said. I don't want. Too bad, Kale cut in, you're having our children. Soren opened his mouth. Then froze as another contraction hit harder than before. When it passed, he looked exhausted. Completely drained. Fine, he whispered, but after this I'm leaving. My chest cracked open. Soren. Don't. His eyes closed. Just don't. The doctor arrived minutes later. Quick. Efficient. Focused. 8 centimeters, she announced. Twins, this is moving fast. Twins. Confirmed. Reality hit harder. You're strong, she added, glancing at Soren. Stronger than most. She didn't know the half of it. Hours blurred. Pain. Breathing. Shouted encouragement. Tears. Soren didn't look at us. Didn't speak unless necessary. And we deserved every second of that distance. Why? He suddenly asked between contractions. Kale froze. Why did you believe him? Soren's voice cracked. Why was it so easy to throw me away? Neither of us had an answer that mattered. Because nothing could justify it. Time to push, the doctor said. Everything exploded into motion. Soren was incredible. Fierce. Terrifying. Beautiful. A storm refusing to break. I held one hand. Kale held the other. And we both knew. We didn't deserve to be there. A cry split the room. Then another. 2. 2 lives. 2 sons. Perfect. Alive. Ours. Can I hold them? Soren whispered. They placed the bobbies on his chest. And everything else faded. He looked down at them. And something inside his expression shattered. Love. And grief. At the same time. Names? A nurse asked gently. Soren hesitated. Then. Eli, he said softly, and Noah. I repeated them silently. Burning them into my soul. Mine. Ours. But not really. Because Soren had already made it clear. We weren't a family. Just. Fathers. In somehow. That hurt more than anything. Soren didn't look at us when the nurses handed over the paperwork. He kept his eyes on Eli and Noah, like the rest of the world didn't exist. Like we didn't exist. And maybe we didn't. Not in the way we used to. The hospital room was quiet now. Too quiet. The chaos of birth had faded into something fragile. Something breakable. Soren sat propped up against the pillows, both bobbies tucked against his chest. Eli was already fussing, tiny face scrunched in protest, while Noah slept like nothing in the world could touch him. Soren adjusted them instinctively. Carefully. Like he'd been doing this forever. My throat tightened. He shouldn't have had to learn alone. You should rest, Kale said softly. Soren didn't answer. Just kept his gaze on the bobbies. I'm fine. He was. Anyone could see that. Dark circles, pale skin, shoulders too thin. Exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. You just gave birth, I said. You need sleep. Soren's lips twitched. Funny, didn't realize you cared. The words weren't loud, but they hit harder than anything he'd said so far. Because they were true. We hadn't cared. Not when it mattered. A nurse stepped in, checking monitors, adjusting blankets. Try to get some rest, she told Soren gently. You've done more than enough for one day. Soren nodded, but his grip on the bobbies didn't loosen. Like if he let go, they'd disappear. It took another hour before the nurse convinced him to let them be placed in the bassinet beside the bed. Soren watched every second. Every movement. Every breath they took. Only when they were settled did he finally lean back. Eyes closing. Just for a moment. He fell asleep almost instantly. Like his body couldn't fight it anymore. Kale and I stood there unmoving. Watching. Afraid that if we did anything, we'd break whatever fragile piece existed in that room. He's smaller, Kale murmured. I knew what he meant. Not physically. Soren had always been slim. But now, he looked diminished. Like the world had taken pieces of him and never given them back. I stepped closer to the bassinet. Eli shifted, letting out a small sound. No, it didn't move at all. 2 tiny lives. Completely dependent. Completely innocent. My chest tightened. We did this, I said quietly. Kale didn't argue. 3 days. That's how long Soren stayed in the hospital. 3 days of distance. 3 days of careful politeness. 3 days of us trying. And failing. To bridge the gap. We brought food. His favorites. The bakery strawberry rolls he used to love. Warm soup. Fresh fruit. Soren ate because he had to. Not because he wanted to. We offered help. He accepted it. But only when it involved the bobbies. Hold him. Can you pass that? Watch Eli for a second. Nothing more. Nothing personal. Nothing soft. On the second night, I found him awake. Sitting in the dim light. Both bobbies asleep beside him. He was staring at nothing. Lost somewhere I couldn't reach. You should sleep, I said quietly. Soren didn't look at me. Can't. Why? A long pause. Then, I keep thinking if I close my eyes, this will all disappear. My chest ached. It won't. You don't know that. I do. Finally, he looked at me. Those golden eyes were duller now. Still beautiful. But guarded. I didn't think they'd be real, he admitted. I kept telling myself not to get attached. Each word felt like a blade. They're real, I said softly. Soren nodded. Yeah. Silence stretched between us. Heavy. Uncomfortable. I don't hate you, he said suddenly. The words caught me off guard. But I don't trust you either. Fair. Completely fair. You shouldn't, I said. His gaze flickered slightly. Like he hadn't expected that. I don't know what this is, Soren continued. You being here, acting like we're something. We're not pretending, Kale said from the doorway. I hadn't even heard him come in. Soren's shoulders stiffened. Then what is it? Kale hesitated. For once, my brother didn't have an answer. Whatever you want it to be, I said finally. Soren let out a quiet breath. That's the problem. The third day came too fast. Discharge papers. Instructions. Care guidelines. A nurse explaining feeding schedules while Soren nodded like he was memorizing every word. Because he was. Because he had no choice. We'll take you home, Kale said. Soren froze. Then slowly shook his head. No. My stomach dropped. Soren. I'm not going back there. Not home. Never home. Just a place. A place we destroyed. You can't go back to the streets, I said, sharper than I meant to. I'm not, he replied calmly. That got our attention. I have somewhere. Where? A friend. The word felt like a punch. Because while we'd been living in luxury, someone else had stepped in. Someone else had helped him survive. Who? Kale asked. Soren's expression hardened instantly. None of your business. Right. We didn't have that right anymore. At least let us help, I said, an apartment somewhere safe. I don't want your monies. It's not about money. It always is with you. That stung. Because once. It was true. Kale stepped forward slowly. Then don't take it for yourself, he said quietly. Take it for them. He nodded toward the bobbies. Soren's grip tightened around Eli. Conflict flickered across his face. Sharp. Painful. Real. A long silence. Then. I picked the place. Relief hit so hard I almost staggered. Anything, I said immediately. And I don't owe you anything. You don't, Kale agreed. And this doesn't fix anything. I know. Soren looked between us. Measuring. Weighing. Deciding. Fine. It wasn't forgiveness. Not even close. But it wasn't rejection either. And for now. That was enough. The apartment was small. Too small for what Soren deserved. Too plain. Too quiet. But it was safe. And right now. That was the only thing that mattered. Soren stood in the middle of the living room, Eli strapped carefully to his chest while Noah slept in his arms. Sunlight filtered through wide windows, soft and warm. For a moment, he looked almost peaceful. Almost. It's fine, he said finally. Just fine. Not warm. Not happy. Not home. Kale nodded like that didn't hit something deep. We can change anything, he said. Furniture layout. No. Soren's voice was immediate. Firm. This is enough. Enough. Like he was still trying to take up less space. Like he didn't believe he deserved more. I swallowed hard. We'll bring the rest of the things later. Soren stiffened. You're not staying. Not a question. A statement. We just want to help set up. I said you're not staying. Silence fell. Sharp. Uncomfortable. Noah stirred slightly. Soren adjusted him automatically, his entire focus shifting in an instant. Like we didn't exist anymore. Like we were background noise. Okay, Kale said quietly. I glanced at him. That was it. But he just shook his head slightly. Not now. We left. The door closed behind us with a soft click. And somehow. That sound felt louder than anything. He won't let us in, I muttered. Kale leaned against the wall, dragging a hand down his face. We didn't give him a reason to before. That was before. And this is after. His voice was tired. Not angry. Not defensive. Just honest. We had no right to push. No right to demand. So we didn't. Instead, we showed up. The next day we brought groceries. Left them at the door. Didn't knock. The day after that. Baby supplies. Diapers. Formula. A stroller. Still no knocking. Still no forcing. On the fourth day. The door opened. Soren stood there. Hair slightly messy. Dark circles still visible. Eli against his shoulder. Noah in the crib behind him. You're going to wake them, he said quietly. Not angry. Just tired. Sorry, I said immediately. He looked down at the bags in my hands. Then back at me. You can come in, he said. Like this video and subscribe this Chanel. Let's back to the story. But only for a minute. It felt like being allowed to breathe again. The apartment smelled faintly like baby powder and something warm. Milk. Soft fabric. Home. Or at least. Something trying to be. Soren moved carefully, placing Eli into the crib beside Noah. Both bobbies shifted, tiny sounds filling the room. I couldn't stop staring. They look bigger, I said before I could stop myself. Soren's lips twitched slightly. They eat every 2 hours, of course they're bigger. There it was. A glimpse. A tiny piece of the Soren we used to know. We brought supplies, Kale said, setting the bags down. I can see that. You needed them. I would have figured it out. I know. Soren paused. That answer. It mattered. Because it wasn't pity. It was acknowledgement. A small silence settled between us. Not as sharp as before. Still fragile. But softer. Can you hold him? Soren asked suddenly. I froze. What? Eli, he said, already lifting the baby. I need to wash the bottles. For a second. I couldn't move. Didn't trust myself to. Then instinct took over. I stepped forward, hands careful, almost shaking. Soren placed Eli into my arms. Warm. So small. So real. My chest tightened painfully. Hey, I whispered. Eli made a tiny noise. Like he recognized something. Or maybe I just wanted him to. Across the room, Kale picked up Noah just as naturally. Like we hadn't missed 9 months. Like we hadn't lost anything. But we had. And the weight of it sat heavy in my chest. Soren moved around us quietly, washing bottles, organizing things, his movements efficient. Controlled. He didn't look at us. Didn't speak. But he didn't ask us to leave either. That mattered. When he finished, he turned back. Paused. Watched us. We must have looked ridiculous. 2 Mafia alphas. Standing in a small apartment. Holding bobbies like they were made of glass. Soren's expression shifted. Just slightly. Something softer. Something conflicted. He likes being held upright, Soren said, nodding toward Eli. Otherwise he gets fussy. I adjusted immediately. Careful. Focused. Like this video and subscribe this Chanel. Let's back to the story. Yeah. That was it. That was how it started. Not forgiveness. Not trust. Just instructions. Days turned into a routine. We didn't stay long. Didn't push boundaries. But we came every day. Sometimes Soren let us in. Sometimes he didn't. And when he didn't, we left without argument slowly. Things changed. Hold Noah. Can you grab that? They need feeding, small things. Practical things. But they added up one afternoon. I found Soren asleep on the couch. Both bobbies in their bassinet. Room quiet. Still for a moment I panicked. Then I saw his chest rising. Slow. Steady. Exhaustion had taken him again. Kale moved silently, picking up Noah before he could start crying. I took Eli. We didn't wake Soren for 2 hours. We took care of them. Fed them. Changed them. Rocked them when Soren woke up. He didn't panic. Didn't snap. Didn't pull away, he just watched. You didn't leave, he said quietly. No. A pause. You could have. We won't. Something shifted again. Settle. But real that night. As we were leaving. Soren spoke, you can come tomorrow. I stilled. We were going to anyway. I know. A small pause. Then. Just come earlier wasn't much. But it wasn't nothing. And for the first time, it felt like we weren't just being tolerated. We were being allowed. We started coming earlier. Just like Soren asked. At first it was still careful. Measured. We didn't overstep. Didn't stay too long. Didn't assume anything, but the apartment began to change. There were more sounds now. Baby cries echoing through the rooms. Soft lullabies, Soren's voice quiet and tired. The hum of something alive in us. We were part of it. Even if just barely. Green one. I blinked. What? Soren didn't look up from where he was holding Noah. The pacifier, he said. Eli hates the blue one, he only takes the green. I immediately switched it out. Eli calmed within seconds. Soren noticed. Didn't say anything. But he noticed. That's how it went. Instructions. Corrections. Small observations. Support his head. You're holding him too low. He just ate, don't bounce him like that. None of it was gentle. None of it was soft. But it wasn't rejection either. It was teaching. And we learned. Fast. Kale figured out how to change diapers in under a minute. I learned the exact rhythm that got Eli to stop crying. We memorized feeding times, sleep patterns, every tiny detail because we had to. Because this mattered more than anything we'd ever done. One evening, Eli wouldn't stop crying. Nothing worked. Feeding, rocking, walking. Nothing. Soren took him, exhaustion clear in every movement. He's overtired, he muttered. He does this when he fights sleep. I watched closely. Soren didn't rush. Didn't panic. Just held him close. Soft. Steady. Minutes passed. Eli's cries slowly faded. Then stopped. How did you? Routine, Soren said simply. Like it was obvious. Like he hadn't learned it alone. Guilt twisted in my chest again. You shouldn't have had to figure all this out by yourself, I said quietly. Soren froze. Just for a second, then, like this video and subscribe this Chanel. Let's back to the story. I didn't have a choice. The words weren't angry. That made them worse. Kale shifted beside me. We should have been there. Silence. Heavy. Soren adjusted Eli in his arms. You weren't. Nothing else needed to be said that night. We stayed longer than usual. Not because we pushed, but because Soren didn't tell us to leave. The Bobbies finally fell asleep. The apartment grew quiet, soft, peaceful. Soren sat on the floor, back against the couch, eyes half closed, too tired to move. To bed, I said. He shook his head weakly. Still need to clean the bottles. I'll do it. That got his attention. You don't know how, then show me. A long pause. Then, Soren slowly stood. Walked to the kitchen. I followed. Not like that, he said immediately when I picked one up wrong. You have to sterilize them properly. Okay, how? He showed me. Step by step. Careful. Precise. I didn't rush. Didn't interrupt. Just listened. Because this was something he built. Something he knew. Something we didn't. When I finished, Soren checked them. Inspected each one. Good, he said quietly. It felt ridiculous. How much that one word mattered. When I turned, Kale was watching us. Something unreadable in his expression. Later, we were about to leave. When Soren spoke again. You don't have to go. Both of us froze. What? Kale asked carefully. Soren looked away. Fidgeted slightly. They wake up a lot at night, he muttered, and it's just easier with 3 people. That wasn't the real reason. We all knew it. But we didn't call it out. Okay, I said quietly. We didn't touch him. Didn't get too close. Kale took the couch. I took the chair. Soren disappeared into the bedroom with the Bobbies. For a long time. No one spoke. Then, a soft cry. Instinct kicked in. All 3 of us moved at once. We stopped in the doorway. Soren stood there already holding Noah. Eli still crying in the crib. I've got him, I said. Soren hesitated. Just for a second. Then stepped aside. I picked Eli up carefully. Held him close. Rocked him gently. It took time. But eventually, he settled. When I looked up, Soren was watching me. Not guarded. Not distant. Just watching. You're better, he said quietly. Something in my chest tightened. Trying to be. He nodded. That night changed something. Not everything. Not enough. But something. Because the next morning, when we woke up, Soren didn't look surprised we were still there. He just handed Kale a bottle and said, Your turn. And for the first time, it felt like we weren't just fixing a mistake. We were building something new. Fragile. Uncertain. But real. The first time Soren let us stay overnight without saying it out loud, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like walking on glass. Barefoot. Careful. And still bleeding. Nothing had changed officially. No agreement. No forgiveness. No words like family. Just space. Shared space. Temporary tolerance. But even tolerance from Soren felt like something rare. Something we didn't deserve. Like this video and subscribe this Chanel. Let's back to the story. That night I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind. The wrong kind. The couch beside me was empty. Kale was gone too. My body moved before my thoughts did. I found them in the hallway first. Kale standing frozen. Soren in front of him. Eli crying in his arms. Noah in the crib behind him, starting to stir. Something was wrong. I said don't touch him, Soren's voice cut through the dark. Sharp. Cold. Kale didn't move. He was crying. I can handle it. You are asleep. Soren's head snapped up. And that means you take him without asking. Silence. Heavy. Eli's cry filled the space again. Soren held him tighter. Too tight. Not hurting him, but close enough that it looked like fear. I stepped forward slowly. Soren, what happened? He didn't look at me. Didn't answer. Kale exhaled sharply. I didn't mean anything by it. That's the problem, Soren said quietly. Finally looking up. None of you think before you take. The words hit harder than they should have. Because they weren't about a baby. They were about him. I wasn't taking him away, Kale said, frustration breaking through. I was trying to help. I didn't ask you to. A pause. Then softer. Don't touch my children without asking. My chest tightened. My children. Not yours and ours, his, still his, even now. I thought we were past this, I said quietly. Soren let out a bitter laugh. You think a few nights of babysitting fixes what you did. Silence. No one answered. Because there wasn't one, Eli finally settled in Soren's arms, but his breathing was still uneven. Soren shifted him carefully. Soothing. Automatic. I don't sleep deeply, Soren said after a moment. His voice was quieter now. Less sharp. Still guarded. I hear everything. That landed differently, everything. Every time we moved. Every time we spoke. Every time we existed too loudly in his space. And when I don't know where he is, he continued, my brain goes there. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Kale looked down. For the first time. He didn't have a rebuttal. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he said finally. Soren stared at him for a long moment. I know. A pause. That's what makes it worse. Something broke in the air after that. Not loudly. Quietly. Like something too tired to hold its shape anymore, Soren walked past us into the room. Didn't slam the door. Didn't tell us to leave. Just closed it, and that hurt more. We stayed in the hallway. Not speaking. I didn't think it would be like this, Kale muttered. Like what? Like we're always one mistake away from losing everything again. I swallowed. We already lost it, didn't argue. Because it was true, inside the room I could hear Soren moving. Soft steps. Low voice. Probably singing. Probably soothing Eli back to sleep. He didn't need us. He just allowed us. There was a difference. A painful one. The next morning nothing was said about it. Soren acted like it didn't happen. That was his way, but something had shifted. Settle. Invisible, he gave fewer instructions. Watched us more. Corrected less, not trust. Not yet, but awareness. That afternoon I reached for Noah instinctively when he started fussing. Soren saw it, paused, hesitated, then didn't stop me. That was new. You're holding him wrong, he said anyway. But there was no edge in it. Just habit. I adjusted. Like this video and subscribe this Chanel. Let's back to the story. He didn't take him back. We stood there in silence for a while. Noah slowly calming in my arms. Soren watching. You're scared, I said before I could stop myself. His eyes flicked to me immediately. No. But it wasn't convincing. You are, I repeated softly, not of us, of everything going wrong again. Silence stretched. Long. Heavy. Then. Yes, he admitted. Barely audible. Something inside my chest cracked open. Because that was the first honest thing he'd given us. Kale stepped closer slowly. We won't take them, he said quietly. Not from you, not ever. Soren didn't answer. But he didn't step back either. That night, Soren did something unexpected. He left the door open. Not wide. Just slightly. Like he didn't want distance to feel final anymore. And for the first time since we found him again, we didn't feel like strangers in his life. We felt like something worse. Something unfinished. And unfinished things hurt the most. The apartment didn't feel like Soren anymore, but it also didn't feel like ours. It existed somewhere in between, like a fragile pause the world hadn't decided how to break yet. That was the strange part about the days after everything shifted. Nothing loud happened, nothing dramatic, but the air itself changed shape. Soren still moved like a shadow through the rooms, quiet and controlled, but now there was something else beneath it. Awareness. He knew when we were there without looking. He knew when we were too close, and sometimes, just sometimes, he didn't move away immediately. Eli and Noah had started to grow into the space. Their cries were less sharp now, more demanding than desperate, like they were learning the world wasn't entirely cruel. Soren handled them with a precision that felt almost painful to watch, like every action had been practiced in loneliness. But what hurt more was how natural it had become for him to do it alone. Even when we were right there helping, it still felt like we were assisting in something he had already survived without us. That morning, I found Soren sitting by the window with Noah asleep against his chest, and Eli in a small rocker beside him. The sunlight hit his face in soft lines, making him look younger for a moment, like the exhaustion hadn't carved itself permanently into his features. He didn't notice me right away, or maybe he did and just didn't react. That was another thing about him now. He chose his reactions carefully, like trust was something expensive he couldn't afford to waste. You didn't sleep, I said quietly, stepping closer. Soren didn't look at me. I did. That's not sleep. A pause, then almost tiredly, it's enough. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough for someone like him, someone who had been forced to become strong in the worst way possible. I stood there for a moment, unsure of whether to push or stay silent, and that hesitation alone felt like progress compared to before. Soren used to flinch when we got too close. Now he just watched us like he was deciding whether we were worth reacting to. Kale entered a few minutes later carrying groceries, and the atmosphere shifted slightly, not tense but alert. Soren adjusted Noah instinctively, his body always reacting before his mind did. It was subtle, but I noticed it every time. He still expected things to be taken away. Even now, even here. I'll put these away, Kale said, softer than usual. Soren nodded once. Formula is on the second shelf, don't mix the wrong ones. There was no edge in his voice anymore, just instruction. That was what scared me sometimes. Not his anger, but the absence of it. Anger meant he still felt something for us. This neutrality felt more like distance becoming permanent. Later, when Eli started crying again, I picked him up before Soren could even move. It was instinct now, something we had learned through repetition and quiet observation. But this time, Soren didn't immediately watch me with suspicion. He only glanced over briefly, like he was measuring whether I would do it correctly. Eli settled quickly against my shoulder, his tiny hands curling into my shirt, and I felt Soren's eyes linger a second longer than usual. You're holding him better, he said after a moment. It wasn't praise, it wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either, it was observation. And coming from him, that was almost more significant than anything else. Kale sat down across from him, careful, like approaching something unpredictable. We're not going anywhere, he said quietly, if that's what you're worried about. Soren didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted toward the sleeping bobbies, then back to the window, as if the world outside held answers we didn't. I'm not worried about you leaving, he said finally. I'm worried about you staying. That sentence hung in the air like something heavy and unmovable. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't anger, it was fear shaped into words. And it made everything worse because fear meant he still expected loss. Even now, even with us trying to exist correctly this time. I don't know how to believe people who broke me, Soren added after a pause, quieter now, almost to himself. And I don't know how to stop expecting it again. No one spoke after that because there was nothing useful to say. Apologies had already been spent. Promises meant nothing here. Only time did, and even time wasn't guaranteed to fix anything. That evening something small happened, but small things were the only things that mattered now. Soren fell asleep on the couch while feeding Noah, his head tilted slightly, his grip still protective even in rest. For a moment Kale and I just stood there unsure. Then slowly I took Noah from his arms while Kale adjusted a blanket over him. Soren didn't wake up. He didn't panic. He didn't react at all. And that was new. We didn't speak about it afterward. We didn't need to because we both understood the weight of it. Trust wasn't arriving in declarations. It was arriving in sleep, in silence, in hands not pulling away. But even as things began to soften, there was still something unspoken between us all, a truth no one wanted to say out loud. Healing wasn't the same as forgiveness, and Soren wasn't healing for us. He was healing in spite of us. And maybe that was the part we deserved most. Soren started disappearing into silence in a different way now. Not the sharp, defensive silence he used in the beginning, and not the exhausted one from the hospital days, but something quieter, more controlled, like he was learning how to exist without needing to be seen at all. Even when he was in the same room as us, it sometimes felt like he had already stepped half a world away. The only time he fully came back was when Eli or Noah made a sound, like their existence anchored him more than anything we could say or do. The routine in the apartment had settled into something almost unnatural in its stability. We came in the mornings now without hesitation. Soren didn't always open the door immediately, but he always opened it. That alone had become its own kind of language between us. No invitation, no rejection, just allowance. Inside, everything revolved around the bobbies. Feeding, changing, cleaning, soothing. It wasn't chaos anymore, it was structure. And Soren had built that structure alone before we ever returned. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the floor with Noah leaning against his chest while Eli crawled awkwardly nearby, grabbing at anything within reach. Soren didn't stop him unless it was dangerous. He just watched, quietly correcting with soft touches when needed. There was something almost unbearable about the calm in him, not happiness, not peace, just endurance shaped into routine. "You're tired," I said softly, kneeling beside him. Soren didn't look up immediately. "I'm fine." "You said that yesterday." "And I was fine yesterday too." The answer was automatic, practiced. Like he had spent too long convincing people he didn't need help, that it had become part of his identity. I hesitated, then reached out carefully, adjusting Eli before he bumped into the edge of the table. Soren's eyes flicked to my hand, not with suspicion anymore, but with calculation, like he was still learning whether I deserved to be trusted with something fragile. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore," I said quietly. That made him pause, not physically but emotionally, a subtle shift like something inside him tightened. "I did it alone before," he said after a moment, "so I know I can do it again." "That's not the point." He finally looked at me then, really looked. His golden eyes were calmer now than before, but they carried something deeper underneath, something that didn't soften easily. "The point," he said quietly, "is that I already learned what happens when I rely on people who decide I don't matter." The words weren't sharp, they were steady, final in a way that didn't invite argument. Kale entered a few minutes later, stopping when he noticed the tension. He didn't interrupt it immediately. Instead, he sat across from Soren, watching Eli try to stand unsteadily before falling back onto the carpet with a soft thud. Soren instinctively reached out, steadying him without even thinking. "You still think we're going to take them from you," Kale said finally. Soren didn't deny it. He didn't agree either. That silence was answer enough. "I don't think that," Soren said eventually. "I expect it." And that distinction made everything heavier. Later that night, after the bobbies were asleep, the apartment felt too quiet again. Soren stood by the kitchen counter, washing bottles in slow, deliberate movements. I stood nearby but didn't speak at first, unsure whether words would help or damage what little stability we had. The sound of water filled the space between us. "You don't trust us," I said eventually. Soren didn't stop washing. "No." The honesty was immediate, clean, no hesitation. "And you don't think you ever will?" I asked. He paused then, just for a second, as if the question required more honesty than he wanted to give. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I can survive without trusting you." That was the difference. He wasn't dependent on us. He wasn't waiting for us to fix anything. He had already built a version of life where we were optional. Kale leaned against the counter beside him. "We're not asking you to depend on us," he said quietly. "We're asking you to stop expecting us to fail you." Soren finally turned off the water. The silence that followed felt sharp. I don't expect you to fail, he said. Then softer, almost like it cost him something to admit it, I expect myself to stop needing anything from you before I get hurt again. That sentence lingered longer than anything else. Because it wasn't about anger anymore. It was about fear trained into habit. And realizing that made it worse, not better. That night something changed again, but not in a way anyone could name. Soren didn't ask us to leave early. He didn't tell us to stay either. He just let the night continue until it naturally dissolved into exhaustion. When Eli cried briefly around midnight, I picked him up before Soren even moved, and this time, Soren didn't watch me like he was testing whether I would do it right. He just closed his eyes for a moment, as if accepting that some things didn't need to be guarded constantly. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it wasn't resistance anymore either. And somewhere between those two things, a fragile space was forming, one none of us knew how to name without breaking it. Because love in this room still didn't feel like love. It felt like survival learning how to share space with danger. Time had started to blur inside the apartment in a way none of us talked about. Days didn't feel like beginnings or endings anymore. They just continued, like breath you don't consciously notice until something forces you to. Soren had become the center of that rhythm without ever asking for it. Everything still revolved around Eli and Noah, but now there was structure instead of survival, and somehow that made the distance between us more visible, not less. Soren didn't soften the way people usually did when they were healing. He didn't suddenly become warm or forgiving. Instead, he became precise. Controlled, predictable in a way that wasn't comforting, it was strategic. He learned our habits the same way he learned the Bobby's schedules. He knew when we arrived without looking at the clock. He knew who would reach for which child first. And he adjusted accordingly, always staying one step emotionally detached from anything that might give us leverage over him again. That morning, I found him in the kitchen already awake, hair slightly damp from a quick shower, Noah in a sling against his chest while Eli sat in a small chair nearby, chewing on a soft toy. The scene should have looked domestic, peaceful even, but Soren's posture never fully relaxed. Even now, even here, he held himself like someone prepared for interruption. You didn't wake us, I said quietly. Soren didn't look up from preparing bottles. You were tired. It wasn't kindness, it was efficiency. He had decided what was easier and acted on it. That was how he worked now. Kale entered a few minutes later, pausing when he noticed how smoothly everything was already running. There was a time when Soren would have waited for us, or at least involved us immediately. Now he simply continued without interruption, like our presence was optional and less explicitly needed. I can take Eli, Kale offered. Soren hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking his head. He just ate, he'll spit up if you move him too soon. The correction wasn't harsh, it wasn't even emotional, it was factual. That was what made it harder to interpret. There was no anger left in Soren, not for us at least, but there was also no openness. Later, when Eli began crying unexpectedly, I moved instinctively to pick him up, but Soren stopped me with a simple look. Not a command, not a refusal, just awareness. And somehow that was enough to make me pause. I've got him, Soren said, adjusting Noah with practiced ease before lifting Eli. Eli settled almost immediately against his shoulder. Soren didn't look at us while soothing him. He didn't need to. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. There was no hesitation in him anymore when it came to caring for them. He didn't second-guess his ability to parent alone. He had already proven it to himself in the hardest way possible. We're not necessary anymore, Kale said later that evening, voice low. Soren heard it, of course he did, but he didn't react immediately. When he finally spoke, it was calm. You were never necessary, he said, you just arrived later. That sentence should have been cruel, but it was. It was factual in the same way everything else he said had become. A silence followed that none of us knew how to break. That night I stayed up longer than usual, watching the dim light spill from the nursery doorway. Soren was inside, sitting on the floor with both Bobbies now asleep in front of him. He wasn't touching them anymore, just watching, like he needed to make sure they were still there even when they weren't crying for him. You don't rest, I said softly from the doorway. Soren didn't turn around. I do. That's not rest. A pause. Then quieter than before, it's enough for me. That was the difference now. Everything he did was measured by what he could survive, not what we could offer. I stepped closer, careful not to disturb the quiet. You don't have to keep bracing for something that isn't coming. Soren finally looked back at me then. His eyes were tired, not in a physical sense, but in a deeper way, the kind of tiredness that comes from carrying expectations for too long. You don't know that, he said. You weren't the one who was thrown away. The words weren't sharp anymore. They were settled, like something he had accepted long ago and stopped fighting. Kale appeared behind me, stopping when he heard the last sentence. We're not asking you to forget it, Kale said. We're asking you to stop living inside it. Soren looked at both of us then, really looked, like he was trying to decide if that was even possible. I don't live inside it, he said finally. I live after it, there's a difference. And there was. That was the part we didn't understand at first. Soren wasn't trapped in the past. He had already moved forward. He just didn't want us in the version of the future he built without us. Before we left that night, Soren spoke one more time, softer than before. They're asleep, he said, nodding toward the bobbies. You can sit for a while if you want. It was an invitation in the way we wanted it to be. It was permission. And somehow that was still progress. Because even if he didn't trust us yet, he had stopped shutting us out completely. And for now, that was the only kind of hope we were allowed to have. The apartment no longer felt like a place we were trying to enter. It felt like a place we were being allowed to remain in as long as we understood the limits. Soren had drawn those limits without ever announcing them. There were no rules spoken out loud, no lists of what we could or couldn't do. Instead, there was simply his behavior, steady and unchanging, like a wall that didn't need explanation to be understood. He still woke before everyone else, still handled the bobbies first, still moved through the space with that quiet, controlled efficiency that made it impossible to tell whether he was calm or simply trained to function without needing help. Eli and Noah had become the only things that softened him even slightly, not in an emotional way, but in a way that made him linger longer when they reached for him, as if their small hands had permission to interrupt whatever guarded structure he lived inside. That morning, I found him sitting near the window with Eli balanced carefully on his lap, while Noah lay beside him on a soft blanket. The sunlight came in gently, touching his face in a way that made him look almost younger, but the expression in his eyes didn't match the light. He was watching Eli try to grab at the air, patient but distant, like he was observing something he didn't fully belong to, but was responsible for anyway. You didn't sleep again, I said quietly as I entered. Soren didn't look up, I did. You were awake at 3. A pause, then flatly, that's still part of the night, not the whole thing. It wasn't defiance, it was correction, like he was refusing to let language define him inaccurately. Kale entered behind me, carrying a small bottle and pausing when he saw how still everything was. There was a kind of tension in the air that didn't come from conflict anymore, it came from stability that hadn't yet become comfort. You should let us take them for a while, Kale said carefully. Soren adjusted Eli slightly without hesitation. He's fine. It's not about him being fine, I said. It's about you being exhausted. That made him finally look at us. Not sharply, not emotionally, just fully. I know how to be exhausted, he said. I've been doing it longer than both of you have been present. There was no accusation in it, just fact, and that fact created distance no apology could immediately close. A long silence followed, broken only by Eli making small sounds as he tugged at Soren's sleeve. Soren didn't stop him, he never did unless it was necessary, but even in that gentleness there was control, not over the bobbies but over himself, over how much he allowed anything to affect him. Later Kale tried again. You don't have to keep proving you can survive without us, he said. Soren's hands paused briefly on the bottle he was preparing. I'm not proving anything, he said. I already know I can survive without you. That sentence landed differently than it used to. Before it would have been anger, now it was something more dangerous, certainty. And you think that's enough? I asked quietly. Soren finally set the bottle down. I think it's what I have, he replied. Everything else is optional. That word optional stayed in the room long after he stopped speaking. Because it meant we were not anchors. We were not necessary. We were simply present. And presence without necessity is fragile. That evening, something shifted slightly, not in behavior but in timing. Soren didn't immediately retreat to the nursery after feeding the bobbies. He stayed in the living area while they slept nearby, leaning against the couch with his arms loosely folded, eyes half lowered but not fully closed. It was the closest he had come to rest in front of us without actively guarding it. Kale sat across from him first, then me. None of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it was just unfamiliar. After a long time I spoke. You don't have to keep expecting betrayal every time things are quiet. Soren didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed somewhere between us and nothing. Quiet is when people leave, he said eventually. That's not true anymore, Kale said. Soren finally turned his head slightly, just enough to look at him. It was true once, he said, that doesn't erase it. And that was the core of it. He wasn't refusing change. He was refusing to override experience with hope. Later that night, I stayed behind after Kale left. The apartment was dim, the only light coming from the nursery door slightly open. Soren stood there for a long moment before speaking. You can go, he said quietly. I'm not here to leave, I replied. That made him pause, not emotionally but physically, like the concept didn't process easily. Soren didn't turn around. You're all still trying to get something back from me, he said. I stepped closer, stopping just behind him. And what if we're just trying to stay? For a moment, he didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough to feel like a decision being made. Then quietly, staying doesn't undo what already happened. I know, I said, but it changes what happens next. That was the first time he didn't immediately reject the idea. Not acceptance. Not trust. Just not rejection. And for Soren, that was the closest thing to breaking open he had allowed so far. The change didn't arrive like a moment. It arrived like weather, slow, uncertain, impossible to point at and say this is where everything shifted. The apartment stayed the same on the surface. The same rooms, the same routines, the same quiet sounds of bottles and blankets and small breathing lives. But underneath all of it, something in Soren had started to loosen, not into trust, not into warmth, but into something far more fragile. Acceptance that didn't feel like surrender. He no longer treated every interaction like it might end in loss. Not fully, not always, but enough that there were moments where his shoulders weren't constantly braced. Moments where he would sit on the floor even after the bobbies were asleep, simply because he didn't immediately get up and disappear into distance. It was subtle, almost invisible, but for people who had learned to read him, it was everything. That night, Eli and Noah were already asleep when I found Soren sitting by the window again. This time, he wasn't holding anything. His hands were resting loosely in his lap, his gaze fixed outside where the streetlights painted faint lines across the glass. The room was quiet in a different way than before, less guarded, more lived in, like even silence had learned it didn't need to be defensive here anymore. Kale was the first to speak when he arrived, stopping a few steps inside. They're sleeping well, he said softly. If you are not subscribed yet now, please hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. Let's back to the story. Soren nodded once. They're healthy. Not good, not safe, just factual. Still, there was something new in how he said it, like he wasn't preparing for the opposite anymore. I sat across from him, watching his expression carefully. You've stopped checking the door every 10 minutes, I said quietly. A faint pause. I still check it, he replied. But less, I said. That time he didn't correct me. Silence settled again, but it wasn't heavy. It wasn't defensive, it just was. After a while, Kale spoke again, more carefully this time. You never asked us why we stayed, he said. Soren finally looked at him. You didn't need a reason, he answered. People always stay as long as it benefits them. That's not true, I said immediately. Soren didn't argue. He just looked away again, like disagreement didn't interest him as much as patterns did. I used to believe, he said quietly, that if I kept things controlled enough, nothing could be taken from me again. His voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't even bitter. It was tired in a way that had gone beyond exhaustion and become understanding. And now, Kale asked. Soren glanced toward the nursery door, where faint, even breathing could be heard. Now I understand control doesn't prevent loss, he said. It only delays how much it hurts when it happens. That should have pushed him further away from us. Instead, it didn't. Because for the first time, he wasn't speaking like someone preparing for abandonment. He was speaking like someone describing a truth he had stopped fighting. I stood slowly, stepping closer until I was beside him by the window. Then what do you do with that? I asked. Soren didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on the glass, on the faint reflections of all of us overlapping in the dim light. Then finally, you stop expecting permanence, he said, and you start noticing what's still here. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was attention. And for someone like Soren, attention was the first step toward something he had never been allowed to safely reach before. Kale moved closer too, stopping on his other side. None of us touched him, none of us forced anything. We just existed in the same space without him pulling away. That alone felt unreal. After a long silence, Soren spoke again, softer than before. I don't know if I trust you, he said. We didn't respond immediately, we waited. Then he added, almost like it cost him less to admit it than to hide it. But I don't want to do this alone anymore. The words didn't fix anything. They didn't erase what had happened. They didn't rebuild what was broken. But they changed the shape of the future just slightly, just enough to make it no longer entirely closed. Kale exhaled slowly. Then don't, he said simply. Soren didn't react to the reassurance, he didn't soften, he didn't lean in. But he also didn't move away. And that was where it ended, not in forgiveness, not in perfect understanding, not in some impossible healing. But in a quiet room with 2 sleeping children and 3 people who finally stopped pretending the past could be erased and started learning how to exist in the same present without destroying it. Soren stayed where he was when we eventually stood to leave the room for the night. He didn't call us back, he didn't shut the door. He just remained there by the window, watching the night outside like it was no longer something he had to survive alone. And for the first time, that was enough.